Hello everyone, I'm Mike Connors, and welcome to How It Ticks, the go-to podcast for anyone with a spark of curiosity about the inner workings of Switzerland. Hosted by yours truly, an Australian expat with a deep curiosity, How It Ticks offers a platform where listeners are invited to explore the vast landscape of Swiss culture, business, innovation, and tradition. Each episode features a one-on-one interview with experts and thought leaders from various fields, providing a panoramic view of what makes Switzerland tick. If you are like me and you enjoy listening to successful people share their insights, this podcast is for you.
Why do so many of us struggle to get enough sleep? What's the real impact of poor sleep on our minds and bodies? If we struggle falling asleep or staying asleep, what can we do about it? And should the amount of sleep we get change as we get older? In this episode, I'm joined by Caroline Lustenberger, a leading sleep researcher with a PhD in neuroscience from ETH, to explore the fascinating science of sleep and how it influences every aspect of our health. Caroline breaks down some of the biggest myths about sleep, like whether everyone really needs 8 hours a night, or if sleep before midnight is the most restorative. She explains how sleep needs and patterns change as we age, why some people thrive on just 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and how modern habits like screen time and caffeine affect our ability to rest. We dive into practical solutions from creating the perfect sleep environment to managing early wake-ups and restless nights. Caroline also shares her thoughts on sleep trackers, how to interpret their data, and why they might actually do more harm than good. To close, we explore Caroline's involvement in the groundbreaking Herencia initiative, which focuses on the early detection and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Caroline was an absolute joy to talk to, an incredibly knowledgeable person, and it's clear she wants to share the right information about sleep with everyone. Enjoy. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about sleep that you wish people understood better?
Well, I would say there's so many misconceptions still, unfortunately. But today I want to focus on two that keep coming up in the media. And they are oversimplified and frankly also, I would say, very misleading. The first one is, and here I really focus on adult sleep recommendations, is that everyone needs exactly 8 hours of sleep. Well, we are very individual and also sleep is very individual. And so also here it's important to emphasize that not one size fits all. Saying that everyone needs 8 hours of sleep is like saying everyone needs the same shoe size. And of course, there is an average, right? It's 8 hours, and there is a range where most people fit in, which is around 7 to 9 hours. But there is still a significant number of people that need less than 7 hours or more than 9 hours. And this is, of course, very important to understand because it can also be problematic if you try to put everyone in the same box. You might even increase the chance that there are sleep problems. And I'll give you very specific examples for that. So let's assume someone needs just a 6 hours feeling refreshed, after 6 hours and very productive during the day. And suddenly they have the feeling they also need 8 hours. What happens is they try to prolong their time in bed. And a colleague that I know, he told me once, you have to think about sleep like a pizza dough. So if you drag it too much, there will be holes in it. Same will happen to this person. So with time, the next following sleep periods will be, more fragmented, less consolidated. And you might even start having people with sleep problems that did not have problems before. Then we have the other example, right? Someone maybe needs 10 hours of sleep, but then thinks, okay, 8 hours is enough. But doing so, they realize they're not refreshed during the day. So I always tell people, really try to figure out yourself how many hours you need. And a good feeling for that is, what is the number of hours you need to really feel refreshed and productive during the day? If you reflect on that and realize always, almost like constantly are falling asleep when there is a quiet, period when you're sitting in a meeting or in a presentation or so, you probably do not get enough sleep. Right. So you really have to try there to basically maybe give a bit more sleep. At the same time, if you really try to prolong your sleep, but realize that you still do not feel refreshed and you have problems during the day, without being able to somehow get a restorative sleep, it might also be time for you to talk to experts. And there are great places out there here in Switzerland where you can consult if you have the feeling you might have a sleep problem or a sleep disorder. Then a second misconception that keeps coming up is that sleep before midnight is supposedly the healthiest sleep. And I'm not sure why this is always coming up. I just recently read it again in a newspaper. I think it's somehow rooted in the belief that there is a universal ideal bedtime. But it's not true, right? Our body is not interested about the clock time per se. Our body is more interested about the inner clock. And that's, again, very individual. Some people, they are naturally early risers. They love to go to bed early and they are fresh and awake at 5 or 6 in the morning. While others are like these late types where it's for them like unbelievable to go to bed before 1 at night, but then they also might need to sleep until 10 to not feel like a zombie in the morning. And so I think that sleep is only restorative before midnight is actually not true. Every sleep in the first few hours, independent when you started, is just the sleep period that has most deep sleep. And I think that's why also the notion comes from that the early part of sleep is the most restorative one. Yeah.
Does the notion of sleeping before midnight come from the circadian rhythm of 6 till 6? Every person has a clock that is aligned with the sunrise, sunset. Is that where it's coming from? To do with the sunlight?
I can actually not really tell that it's coming from that. First of all, it's a misconception that with sunrise and sunset, everyone sets the clock the same. So because you have different chronotypes, it means also the way your body translates the light signal and how fast it goes that your body thinks it's your inner night is different. For some, it's a bit later, and for some, it's a bit earlier. I think it's also related to the way how society works. I mean, at the moment, society really favors early types, right? So a lot of jobs, also school start times are rather early. And there's also a bit this misconception that if you are a person that gets up earlier, you're a more productive person, a more successful person in life. But I think it has to do that, of course, the schedules of society are also favoring this kind of chronotype, right?
That's interesting. Yeah, my wife is I would call her the creative type. So she usually goes to bed three hours after I do, and also sleeps in. And she is equally as functional as I am, just different times of the day.
Exactly. So if you give them the time to sleep in, they are as productive. They might just have their best productivity later than the ones that rise earlier.
What about people who at least claim that they only need 4 or 5 hours of sleep? Is there a minimum threshold which you think everybody needs, and anybody under that really should reassess the amount of sleep they're getting?
Let me start with a balanced perspective to this question. So first of all, yes, there are indeed a very small fraction of people that need less than 6 hours of sleep, and that are generally thriving on these 4 to 5 hours, and that actually also don't have any negative effects. But these individuals are rare, and it's really an exception, not the rule. So if you know a lot of people around you that claim they need 4 to 5 hours of sleep, I would be a bit suspicious.
I know one very special person, and he's probably listening to this as well. He knows who he is.
Well, that's really funny. Yeah, because I mean, of course, there are very seldomly people that have that. But I think a good sign of self-deception is that, of course, when you have the time to relax during the day, let's say you are listening to a presentation or in a meeting or in a dark room or sitting in a train, and it's very hard for you to not doze off, or you actually frequently fall quickly asleep, it is really a sign that you're not well rested and you for sure need more sleep. Also, if you always have to sleep in during the weekend, if you sleep many more hours during the weekend, during the week, this is also a sign you don't get enough sleep. And I think I want to emphasize here again the problem of society. I think it's a bit less of a problem now, but was for sure before that basically cutting corners in sleep was some kind of a badge of honor, right? That you are a very successful, that you basically favor productivity over sleep. And I'm just kidding, it's just stupid
I'll
if you
sleep when
do
I'm
that.
dead. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It was the notion, right? And I think one problem there is really that you cannot basically discuss with sleep how much you want to have it, right? You need a certain amount of sleep, and this is non-negotiable. What happens if you constantly do sleep deprive or sleep restrict yourself is that, first of all, it will have consequences on your performance. So you do actually the opposite you want, right? You will get less effective, you will have bad decision making, your executive functions are worse, your mood is worse. But over longer time, this also has clear gives clear problems on health related aspects. And so I always say, I mean, really get the sleep amount you need, and that's the best you can do for yourself and your productivity. And here I want to give a very funny example from Bill Gates. I read a year ago an interview with him, and he was one of these people who really thought that, sleep is a lazy habit. And he was in this year about saying, they even competed against, like with colleagues, that if you just sleep like 4 hours, this is really cool. And sometimes you don't sleep at all. This really shows that you're committed to your work and so on. Basically try to beat each other by having less sleep. And his basically mind shifted completely when his father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, because he was starting to read up on the disease itself. And he realized that brain health is very strongly related to sleep and the amount of sleep. And that a very stupid thing you can do is basically to cut sleep, because it can even be involved in the pathology and the cause for Alzheimer's disease. So I think this was the moment for him to realize, well, I shouldn't have done that. And now I really prioritize it in my life.
How much of when I sleep and how long I sleep is determined by society? So if we removed all clocks, all screens, all electricity, all reasons to get up in the morning, and I was just a man in a cave, what would my sleeping pattern, how different would my sleeping pattern be from what it is today?
I think if you stripped away all constraints of modern life, our sleep timing, but also the number of hours we get, will be much more aligned to our biological need. And I think it will specifically affect people who are very much misaligned by society with their inner bedtime and ideal rise time. Right? We know there are individual variations, and society maybe favors rather the early types. So if you are completely shifting yourself because you want to make sure that you are ready at 8 in the morning for the meeting, but you're actually a person who sleeps preferably at 1 or 2 in the morning, and then because of that only get a few hours of sleep, you will basically are really working against your inner clock and your need for sleep. It's also called social jet lag. So without even moving over time zones, you have kind of a misalignment between your inner clock and potentially you do during the day because of society. So it will for sure help to basically get back to your natural rhythm. What I always say is we cannot, of course, strip away these things, right? It's part of our life. But what we can try to do is better understand what is our biological clock, what is our chronotype, when do we function best, when is our ideal bedtime. And then also try as good as possible to move around the social aspects as you can. For instance, one example is, depending on your job, you could talk to your boss and see whether it's possible to maybe start a bit later, but then also stay longer, right? To say basically as a justification that it's just when you are more productive and you will get more things done, right? So that could be an approach.
How do our demands for sleep change as we age? And should people make adjustments as they get older?
So when we age, sleep naturally will also change, and it affects not only how much we sleep, but also a bit the depth of sleep and the pattern of sleep. And I think for a lot of people, this can feel frustrating. But one thing is to understand and also accept that this is part of biology, but also see that we can counteract certain aspects. So first of all, what is changed when we aged very typically is that we have less deep sleep. So the sleep part, also called slow wave sleep, where we have very specific brain activity patterns, so-called slow waves prevailing. These are the stages when we sleep deepest, and they have been related to be involved in restorative brain and body processes. And it's getting more superficial the sleep gets more superficial when you age. And I think some people also realize that they have the feeling they don't sleep as deep anymore as when they were younger. That also comes with more awakenings, a bit more fragmentation of sleep, sometimes also being longer times awake during sleep. And what you also see that on average, the timing shifts a bit as well when your ideal bedtime is. So when you get older, you also start again to be more like early type, so that you go to bed rather earlier, but also get up a bit earlier. Now, there are practical adjustments we can do. And I want to emphasize that very clearly in this podcast. I always say a good sleep begins with a good day. So basically, whatever you do before that time is very, very important. And if you create a day that keeps you engaged, that keeps you active and balanced, and I will still say that keeps you young, it will be reflected in your sleep as well. So specifically, one thing you can do is be physically active. And it doesn't just mean sports, right? It can also be active, like walking, hiking, gardening, playing with your grandchildren, and just moving a lot, like walking a lot, being active. And not just the body, also your mind. So you're never too old to learn new things. I always say keep your brain in shape. It means that you are engaging in new content, that you may have new topics that interest you that you read about, or maybe a new hobby, learning a new language. Just keep yourself engaged. And it's very simple why this is so important, because our sleep is homeostatically regulated. That means the more we need our brain and body, the more we need deep sleep. And we see that if people are more engaged with sports, if they use their brain more, they will have deeper sleep. And what is also funny, it's even on a local level. That means if you need some brain regions more often than others, these brain regions will sleep deeper at night. Mm-hmm. And besides that, of course, this is just basically physical and mental activity, but also that you have and maintain social connections. I think staying connected to family and friends, to a community, reduces stress, gives you a sense of purpose, and that also contributes to better sleep. Practice relaxation techniques, not just before bedtime, but maybe just during the day, like try relaxation and breathing techniques, or these mindful moments where you just rest and be in the moment. And this can also help you to settle your mind before bedtime, but also if you, for instance, have one of these awakenings at night, and instead of being like agitated, you might just try to calm yourself down again. And the final point I want to say is also letting go of the stress that every night needs to be perfect. It's not just part of aging. I think it's part of like different life phases, that there are nights where you don't sleep so well, where you have problems maybe falling asleep or staying asleep. And the worst thing you can do about this is to stress yourself about it, because stress itself makes sleep problems even worse. I always say if you have maybe some times where you wake up a bit earlier or wake up at night and you can't go back to sleep, use this time productively, but not in terms of working, but more like do something you really enjoy, maybe listen to a nice podcast, read a light, enjoyable book, do some relaxation techniques or some visualization techniques, and accept some natural variations that are just part of our life.
So you touched on a lot of different topics I wanted to ask you about. So maybe I'll just start with trying to fall asleep. So, I mean, I'm curious about what you mentioned when you wake up early and and can't get back to sleep. I am certainly guilty of that. But first, I was curious about falling to sleep. If you are lying in bed and you're rolling around, that you just can't seem to get tired enough to switch off. What are some simple techniques or a routine that people can get into to be better at that?
Well, when it comes to struggling with falling asleep, the first step is to understanding why you're having troubles, right? And identifying the root cause also makes it easier to find the right solution. So really ask yourself, what keeps me awake? And there may be simple reasons, right? It could be that you just had coffee before your bedtime, and maybe you're sensitive to caffeine, and it could just make you more awake, and suddenly you don't have this drive of wanting to sleep anymore. Here's a side note. Not everyone is affected by caffeine. Some people really don't have problems when they shortly before bedtime drink caffeine or drink coffee, energy drinks, whatever, but some truly have. This could be one reason. It could be that it might be your diet. So maybe you're like intolerant against something, or you had a very heavy meal directly before sleep and your digestion keeps you awake. Another reason can be that you just did some very arousing activity before sleep. Maybe you're playing a very exciting video game. You were almost not able to, stop playing, but then you just 5 minutes before you wanted to go to bed stopped it. Or you watch a very nerve-wracking movie or a show, or you scroll through social media and are just really agitated because of it. And the third one, which I think many of us face, is that you carry worries about your life, uncertainties, work, stress, personal challenges into your bedroom. And at the moment you try to really relax and close your eyes, it's the moment when all these thoughts come up and you get into this cycle of overthinking. Now, there are, of course, practical solutions to all of these sources. Some are very simple, basically solutions, right? So one for the caffeine, the heavy meals, it's very clear. I mean, if you start to realize, when you drink coffee before sleep, you cannot sleep that well, just stop doing it and maybe stop at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Maybe change when you have your meals. Eat earlier in the evening, not too close to bedtime. Also then have rather light food and nothing that really weighs on your stomach. For arousing activity, I would say set boundaries. First of all, identify whether there is something that might stress you or agitate you. And if you then do these activities, stop them 1 to 2 hours before bedtime and really give yourself the time to wind down and to settle and to relax before you go to sleep. And the third one, with the worrying and the rumination and overthinking cycles, that's something that it needs a bit more work. That means it's not a one-day solution that will help, but it's something you have to start training by actively trying to letting go of these thoughts before sleep. Basically not carrying these thoughts into your bedroom, to your bed. The way you can do that is by practicing already during the day to take more breaks, to have these, I always say, windows of restoration where you pause for a minute and be in the moment, maybe do breathing exercises and relax. We are so used to be like constantly pushing through the day, being productive, but sometimes a few minutes during the day just to calm down and come a bit back to yourself in the moment can help. Also that you learn to use it when it's really needed before sleep, right? If you just practice it before sleep, it might not be practice as well that you regularly do it during the day. And of course, there are very specific pre-bedtime techniques that you can start to do. One thing is to give your thoughts the time and space to think about them, but it should be before your bedtime. And one thing you can do is these so-called worry journals, where you write down all your worries. And after that, just tell yourself, well, you've dealt with that for today, and you can look at it tomorrow again. You don't have to write it down. You can also use visualization techniques, for instance, where you have these thoughts kind of like being carried away by balloons or something like that. And again, actively tell yourself, well, I've worried enough for today. And maybe after a good night of sleep, I also have the mind again for thinking about solutions to these problems. And that what I always like to do is use the time before bed really to shift my focus also to something positive. Very simple, being grateful and counting your blessings and really listing also things you really like during the day. And it doesn't need to be big, right? It can be things like, well, I had a great coffee in the cafeteria, got a nice compliment from a work colleague. I read an interesting book. And if you keep repeating that over time and making it a habit, what your brain starts to do, it's also shifting more to the positive sides. And it's less likely to start worrying and going to spiraling of worrying thoughts. It's really about a habit that you build, and this time basically shift away from worrying and start to be more on the positive feelings and positive thoughts.
What are some other reasons that can keep you up? What if I was like, Caroline, look, I'm actually not stressed at all. My life's very simple and great. I never eat later than 7 p.m. and I, what was the third one? And I don't drink
stress and worrying, right?
And I don't drink any caffeine.
Yeah.
What else? I mean,
it could also be that it's not. It could also be that it's not your ideal bedtime, right? Maybe you're a late person. Maybe when you try to sleep at 10 and it doesn't work, it could just be that your inner clock is telling you, well, it's not night for you at the moment. You can still be productive and awake. That could be a reason. I also emphasize if really sleep problems and quality of life start to suffer because you don't find any way how to make yourself sleep better or sleep the way you want to sleep. Again, there are great resources out there and places you can go to really get consultation about sleep and finding a way to also rule out that there is no like sleep disorder underlying that would need to be treated.
What are some besides being physically and mentally exhausted throughout the day, what are some effective ways to make yourself very tired by the time you go to sleep, to wind down?
I really think it's about, I mentioned it before, I think using your mind, using your body, but then also very actively relax, try to calm down. Have these transition from being in the active, engaged mode to wind down mode and calm down. And one thing that helps you in that is also light itself. So I think the worst you can do to get into a calm down is to have very bright light shining down on you in the whole house. What I always use is like warm light, dim light, maybe LED candles that really also get you in this sense of being tired. And of course, light is a very strong sidekeeper, as one would say, where it tells your body, well, now it starts to be night outside, and then basically the melatonin, the hormone, the darkness hormone, starts to be produced and at one point tells the body that it's time to sleep. Another thing is also temperature regulation. That is very important. And when it comes to temperature there, one of the most important signs for the body to go to sleep is that your core temperature is cooling down a bit and your extremities, so hands and feet, get warmer. And because they get warmer, they also actually relieve some of the heat so the core body temperature can basically go down. And it's one of the most important changes that actually initiates sleep.
So your core body temperature cools down by sending the heat from the core to your extremities. Is that right?
Exactly. And some people have problems with that because they have cold hands and feet, some cold vasoconstriction. So when your blood vessels are like closed in a way or smaller, and then you have less of heat release. And there is also a very simple solution to that. So you can take a warm shower before you sleep, or a hand or foot bath, something that you can do as well that can help you if you have problems with that.
I have read that before, that a hot bath before bed can be very beneficial because getting out of the hot bath as your body cools down, it's indicating that that cooling of the body is an indication that the body, it's time for sleep. Is that right?
Exactly. That's one thing that then afterwards you cool down, but also because your hands and feet are warm, so they release the heat from your core. But again, that's something that could be very individual. I also know some people, they probably would not sleep that well after a hot bath. They would think, well, it's even worse afterwards. It's also something you have to try out yourself. And it's also, again, not a solution that might fit everyone, but I think it's beneficial for a lot of people. So maybe something worth trying.
Would you recommend sort of late night or evening exercise? Or is that, how would you see exercise in the lead up to sleep?
There are many studies about this. And I recently read a review that basically said exercise in general is something good for you, independent of the time of day. But there are also some controversies around that, especially if it's close to bedtime exercise that really agitates you again. If you're suddenly, in a very maybe aggressive mode, maybe it was like contact sports you did, or you basically having a lot of like hormonal changes that make you very awake, might not be ideal for you. But again, that's something you have to try out. Me, for example, when I do intensive sport shortly before bedtime, I'm really tired afterwards. I can directly go to bed. No problem for me. I know people that really need an hour or two afterwards to calm down and then be ready to sleep. So there, I think it's again, trying it out for yourself. I recommend anyway doing exercise, but maybe you have to move it from close to bedtime if you realize that's not good for you to earlier times.
That's it for part 1. Part 2 will be out soon, so keep an eye out for it. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe or follow button. It really helps the show and will also notify you when part 2 is out. Also, if you haven't already, check out the new website, howitticks.ch, where you will find episode details, links, transcript, and a place to share your feedback. I would love to hear from you. See you in part 2.